Okay, so in this first session, we're going to talk about PolyMAT's journey with remote education, specifically Microsoft Teams. And the hope is that this will give you a bit of a background, bit of context for the sessions that we've chosen to run during this, our first episode of PolyMAT Presents, and including the guest speakers and why we've chosen them specifically to present today. So let's get started. So I'm starting off with this graph, which covers the period of the first national lockdown due to COVID-19. And what this is showing, each of the percentages is to do with the percentage of students in the entire school who are accessing and engaging with Microsoft Teams. So you can see back in sort of just end of March, just before April began and before the Easter holidays, there was a very high figure there, 76% engagement. And that really reflects the initial push at the beginning of lockdown, where we ensured that students had access, trained them in how to use it, and got everyone utilizing Microsoft Teams. Then you'll notice that there's a bit of a dip in terms of engagement data right up until sort of just before the May half term. And as the yellow arrow shows there, that's because really we were only using Teams during that period for the setting of assignments rather than doing any kind of live lessons or meetings. It was all assignments. And, therefore, students get notified about those in Microsoft Teams and don't necessarily have to go on to Teams to see it. Some of the assignments, a lot of the assignments didn't involve them actually turning any work in via Teams. It was often pointing them to external websites to do their work. So, it stands to reason that during that period of time, there was less engagement from students, and really that kind of just providing work isn't particularly engaging for students anyway, so it's no surprise to us. And you can see that when we got to just before May half term, there is a big jump in engagement there, and that's where we introduced tutor group meetings for the first time. So this was really to look after student well-being and to get them back seeing their friends, their peers, and also their tutor as well, and their head of year. Then just after half term, we introduced actual live lessons, and you can see again there's a big increase in engagement during that period of time, and the trend line overall is showing improved engagement, and it's largely down to that introduction of live lessons. The few figures at the end where it's starting to dip again, that's just where we no longer had Year 11 and Year 13 using Teams at that stage. But the key message here is that as we've learned and honed our craft in using Teams, our delivery has improved and student engagement has improved as well. And we're still learning, and we're still making changes that hopefully contribute to improving that engagement. And we're keen to show today what we've been doing, but also to learn about what you've been doing in engaging students and getting them to not miss any learning whilst they're working from home. So this kind of summarizes that same journey in text. So before March 2020, we had Teams being limited. So if it was on that graph, it would have been down near the 0% for before March 2020, because there was only a few departments using it, a few teachers in those departments. So computing and science, for instance, were making some use of it, but by no means loads. It wasn't routinely used at all. It had gone through phases of being used more, particularly in the year prior to that, but it wasn't the main way in which we engage students digitally. Then during what we're calling phase 1 of lockdown, which is that March to May period, as I said, we were just doing that assignment setting, there were no live lessons, and that meant that all the lessons really were focused on revising prior learning, prior content. Move forward to phase 2, sort of May half-term time, and you can see there that we introduced those live lessons and also some recorded lessons as well. So some teachers were using things like Loom and recording a lesson inside a Teams meeting on their own in order to provide recorded lessons, and stream became to be used a lot more to store that video footage that we were capturing. But it allowed us then to start focusing our lessons more on the content delivery, new content delivery around that time. I've mentioned the tutor group meetings being introduced. We also had recorded assemblies trialled around that time as well. And we had a very successful series of masterclasses for those students who would be joining us at post 16. Since September, we've then been going further with that. So assemblies that are live. Paige McDonald will talk a little bit more about that in her session later on. We had very successful open evenings. Both those, assemblies and open evenings, were done using Teams live events, as were many of the virtual CPD, Inset Day type stuff that we've done during the course of the year. We've had virtual department meetings, we've had virtual parents evenings, we have had self-isolating teachers teaching from home. So they're beamed into the classroom via Teams. We have another teacher in the classroom who's facilitating that, and he's looking after classroom management in the classroom itself. And we've also had teachers teaching students who are at home. So whether that be a kind of hybrid approach, where the teacher is in the classroom with students physically, but also has some students at home that they're beaming live to, or whether it be the teacher doesn't have anyone physically in front of them, but they are delivering a live lesson to students at home nonetheless. The hybrid area there is one of the areas that we have found difficult, and that's why we're excited that the next speaker will be Elaine Hayes, who has done a lot of writing and talking about hybrid learning, and we're keen to learn more from her. Then in addition to that, we've had virtual Saturday schools and after-school interventions that have been taking place. Again, this is really to do with bubbles and so on, and ensuring that the students don't have to stay back after school. They go home with their bubble, they get home, and then they can tune into these additional interventions or the Saturday school that we're providing for them. So just a reminder then of the expectations from the DfE, which became statutory in October. It's quite a long, set of expectations that they've actually got. But we've summarised it into 5 points that we think are most meaningful for us, and they're there. We have planned our approach to remote learning bearing those in mind. We felt that there were 5 scenarios really in which those plans needed to apply. Number 1 is the individual students that are self-isolating without symptoms. We assume students who've got symptoms are ill or too ill to work, but those who are self-isolating due to contacts and without symptoms, we have to provide remote learning for them. And that really is the sort of hybrid situation that I mentioned earlier, and what we're looking forward to hearing Elaine speak about. The second is where whole year groups are asked to remain at home for 1 or 2 days, and we have had that on occasion this term. The third is what used to be the tier 2 local restrictions, which apparently have been dumped by the government in recent weeks. But this idea that students would be on a rota for 2 weeks or more, and then the vulnerable students would be in school in a kind of hub like we had during the first lockdown. And number 4 is an actual lockdown where the schools are closed except to those vulnerable students and maybe key worker children. And scenario 5 is where we've got teachers dialing in from home, as I mentioned earlier. So we've got a remote education plan that covers all of those, and we've done a lot of work to make sure that colleagues across the trust understand those plans and that they can enact them swiftly when the need arises. And you can find copies of all of that stuff on the PolyMAT website. This is just a quick glimpse into how we set up our teams within the trust. So you can see here that we've got 4 channels. The general channel is always there anyway, but we've configured it specifically to stop students being able to post to that channel. So it's effectively read-only for students. Teachers can post their announcements, their assignments, you know, whatever resources they want to post, they can post to the general channel. And because students can't reply or post their own messages, those won't get lost, sort of, you know, how it pushes stuff up the screen. That won't happen, and they'll always be able to see the latest information. Next, we've got a live lessons channel. So this is where we would post the actual live lesson. So whether that be a recording or whether that be the actual invitation for them to join a live lesson. But what it would mean from the students is that they can see all the live lessons that have happened in that single channel. Again, it's not possible for students to start a post in that channel. They can chat in the meeting itself, but as soon as the meeting finishes, they can't chat any longer, and that's where all the live lesson recordings go. We did used to have a social channel, which worked well during the first lockdown to encourage, you know, peers being able to socialise, you know, off-topic chat, etc. You can see it's got a little padlock next to it. That's because it was a private channel, and the idea was that students would lose or have that revoked if they weren't using it sensibly. We've actually got rid of that channel recently, just because we don't really feel that it's necessary once we're back at school full time. It is something that was more designed for lockdown scenarios. And finally, there's a subject help channel, and this is the channel that students can post messages in. You know, they are told that this needs to be a place for posting work-related questions or requests for help, etc. It's not for social chat, and teachers or other students can respond to those questions. So that's how we've set up most of our teams. You'll see it says Year 7 Virtual School Hub at the top. That's because we did have whole year group teams at one point, and we've now we've still got those, but we've also got the class teams as well. In a nutshell, these were the plans, the options, if you like, for teachers in terms of how they can respond to our plans. So they might decide to do a pre-recorded lesson. You can see there that this is a slide from an inset that we did. So the instructions there are to do a meet now on their own with no people in the meeting. So they would do the meet now and record themselves, and then they can download the recording at the end and provide them with that recording. Now, our sense is that this has a workload impact, and you know, for most staff, we advise them against this route. But there are some staff who prefer it, particularly in practical subjects such as music and art, where they want to show very specific skills. Pre-recording for them has been something that they have preferred and have wanted to do, despite the workload implications. Option 2 is to use a third-party product, and our preferred one is the Oak National Academy. This has been a big success, I think, for you know, everyone involved in it during lockdown 1. It's got some of the best educators in the country creating resources, creating lessons, and you can actually go on there, find a topic that relates to whatever you would normally be teaching, and from the website you can actually set that as a team's assignment. And what we've used this option for most often is where individual students are self-isolating rather than whole year groups. And again, it saves teachers a lot of time. They're not having to pre-record, but they're finding some materials that fit with what the student should be learning and providing them with that work to do at home. Option 3 is to do a live lesson, and you can see in this example we were asking staff to do this from their calendars. So they create they schedule a new meeting from their calendar. They invite the students that they want to be there. So it could be particular classes or a whole year group. They could add additional teachers into that lesson as well. But whoever should be there, that's what they're inviting to the meeting. And again, they record it, and students can see that after the meeting has ended. Now, there is a slight issue around live lessons, which I referred to earlier, which was that hybrid situation. Our teachers have found it incredibly difficult to manage the physical classroom and also be running a live lesson concurrently. So, it is challenging. The people that have done that best usually log into the live lesson on 2 devices. So they'll have the main PC in the classroom projected onto the whiteboard or using the visual display. And they'll also have another device. Sometimes it's their personal phone, sometimes it's an iPad, but they'll have another device, and that device is used for admitting students from the lobby, for keeping an eye on the chat space, and so on. But it isn't a straightforward skill to manage both situations at the same time. Where it's been used more successfully is when all the students in a class or a year group have been at home, and therefore the teacher only has to worry about the virtual classroom and not a physical classroom at the same time. And again, just the last slide from me, we're going to talk a little bit about the expected lesson structure that we put in place for teachers across the trust. I'm not going to talk about this in huge detail because it is covered in what Steve Hodges will talk to you about a bit later on. But essentially what we did is we came up with a structure. I mean, we started off with something much more complex than this, and because we wanted to prioritise staff well-being, and we wanted to prioritise student well-being during lockdown 1 and beyond, we wanted to make it a really simple structure, but one that is informed by research. So we have, a task for them to do as soon as they get into the room, just as we would in a physical classroom. Often that's a PolyMAT quiz, which Mr. Harney is going to talk a bit more about later, a read now activity, which Mr. McCabe is going to talk about a bit later. One of those kind of tasks where they can get on with something as soon as they get into the lesson. Then there's some teaching or modelling that might also involve some live marking from a previous lesson, some work that has been submitted perhaps, looking at some students' work, displaying it on the screen, talking through it, live marking it with the class. That's one of the things we might do. But there is some teaching, there is some actual teaching from a teacher in the virtual lesson. Then there's sort of a split here of 2 different options. I mean, some teachers actually do both, but the point of this is that there is some kind of task that happens, and either it's a create task, so the teacher expects the students to actually do something that they will then hand in or submit via a Teams assignment. So it might be that they're doing some writing, that could be handwritten or it could be typed. They might be doing some drawing, they might be doing some maths questions, but whatever it is, they're doing some work and then they're submitting it to a Teams assignment. Often, one of the most common ways of doing that is to take a photograph of some written work. The other option is to do assessment. So using Microsoft Forms, for instance, to do quizzes at the beginning and end of the lesson. And then finally, there's a section there to do with extending. So, providing some additional tasks to challenge students, to make them go beyond what's happened in the lesson. And yeah, as I say, Mr. Hodges will talk about this a little bit more later on, but that was the lesson structure that we came up with for all the lessons across the mat. And that's kind of it for this first session. Hopefully that gives you a bit of background, a bit of context for where PolyMAT has come from with remote learning, and you know, what we've been doing. And the other speakers will go into more detail on different areas of our remote learning offer.